Hi everyone, welcome back to Geterbrewed. Today I'm joined by Nick Brewing from Murphy & Son. So part of a series of videos that we're doing, and we're going to feature water treatment. So Nick, you have mentioned this to me. Probably the first thing to do is understand your water before you begin. So commercial brewers here in Ireland will send a sample to you to get tested. But how does so we have a water report here from yourselves for our own brewery. How do people at home do that? How do they approach water treatment?
Yeah, really it's fundamental to the brewing process to understand what you've got, what's coming out of your tap, whether it's the mains or a borehole. The very first thing we will look at is the hardness, the alkalinity, or sometimes called the total alkalinity. This is calcium carbonate, which is and calcium sulfate. The salts of calcium dissolved in the water. They significantly impact the way the brewing process and subsequent beer will taste, and certainly the way the process will form. So we look at the alkalinity, and then we know what levels they need to be, the alkalinity needs to be for ales, IPAs, bitters, stouts, porters, lagers, pilsners, pale ales, etc. So we will first of all identify where the raw water coming in sits with all of that.
Yeah.
We'll also look at the calcium content, the actual calcium salt as Ca2+, as the ion calcium. We'll look at the chloride content, we look at the sulfate content, we will look at the sodium content, we look at the nitrate and the nitrite content, and we look at the pH. So those are the 6 or 7 basic parameters.
Yeah.
There are a few others, but they're less important. We get these ones right and designed for and then treated to deliver the profile of water you need for the 3 core beer styles, which are IPAs, bitters, stouts and lagers. Those are the 3 core beer styles. We get them right, fit your water for each of those styles, and then you treat according to our recommendation, and then you will be able to deliver those beer styles correctly.
So I guess if you're based in Northern Ireland here, you can go on to the Water Board website and you can see a sample profile. They publish the results of what they taste. Will that vary dramatically from week to week? In your experience?
In our experience, there's 2 answers to that, sadly. Yes and no, unfortunately. No, it won't usually if you're in a more rural location, because the water consumption by the consumers that the water authorities are producing will be more, there's less demand, so it'll be more consistent. In an urbanised situation like Belfast or some of the big towns, the water authorities are required to supply what's called in modern parlance, potable water. And that just means water of a drinking quality standard, which tends to be it's got to be low in all the coliforms and microbiological flora, which is why they use a little bit of chlorine in the treatment plants. But they're not obliged to change to do anything with hardness or any of the salts that I've mentioned. So, and now the water is gridded like the electricity system, so they can take the water from anywhere where they've got an abundance to satisfy the demand. So it means that they can switch supply, and they won't notify you that the supply is switched. The only way you will notice it is if you are analysing these parameters, and then you will see it change. And we see this in the cities in the UK, like Leeds, Manchester, London, Birmingham, York, Newcastle, all these places. Their water supply can vary and literally overnight sometimes. They can go from soft to hard, high calcium to low calcium. So that's quite a problem for them. And it's why the big guys, the big brewers, install water treatment plants where they remove everything from their water. Like an RO system or some sort of demineralization system, and then dose back the particular salts which they know are suitable to their brand. Now, for the smaller brewer, that's really impractical because it's huge capex and you don't have the volumes to justify that. Instead, you can do it using science, and that's where Murphy's can come into play, because we can say, okay, this is your water. It'll be pretty constant for a smaller player, but it's too hard. So you need to soften it down to a level which is then going to work in brewing, and that's when you can start to use the Murphy product. And we will advise on the dose rate and the application. And then if you want to produce a particular style of bitter, so you need a particular chloride to sulfate ratio, we'll design that into the treatment package as well. And then once you've got that, away you go.
Some good points you made there. To experience that myself, our water here, we're a rural location, and the only time we ever see a fluctuation in the quality of the water is if they're doing maintenance. They tend to maybe flush the line with chlorine afterwards. And
yes, they dose high with chlorine, that's right.
If you're not, taking that chlorine out of your water and then take into the brewery through a charcoal filter system or something, you will notice all of a sudden you have a batch of beer that you go, what's wrong with this? And then when you work it back, you realise, oh, they've been working on the water line. But equally, we have some brewers that are in maybe a tourist attraction area, and it's seasonal, and they'll tell us, or water quality spikes during the peak season because all the tourists have went to that area, so water companies are ploughing different waters from different grids into that area. So I guess, look, for brewers, reach out to us and we'll look at getting your water analysed. But if someone's at home and they're using the water board website and they're taking the particulars off that, if they notice they do have a very soft or very hard water, what would be the starting point for them?
Well, they're very welcome to send us directly or through you these results off the website. I know I've seen that myself, and you can find all this information on the website for the Water Authority, but it's knowing how to treat that profile that as is coming in, to re-engineer it to suit the style of beer that you want to produce, which is important. And that's where we would support with our recommendation and then product.
Is there a general rule of thumb for lagers as stouts? So does a lager respond better to a soft water or a hard water, or is there?
That's right. You're right. It does. That was the reason behind these epicenters of production becoming famous over 200 years ago. Was the quality of the water determined the outcome of the beer. So Pilsen in Czechoslovakia, very, very soft water, hardly anything in it, very, very low alkalinity. Whereas in London and in Dublin, waters coming off clay alluvial deposits were quite high in bicarbonate, and this creates a more smoother mouthfeel, which is pleasantly contrasts with the astringency of the darker malts. So this is what created the birthplace of the stouts that became famous from those areas. And it was the ratio of salts in the Burton water, the 2-to-1 ratio of sulfate to chloride, which delivers a slightly creamy mouthfeel, warm, soft, but also a slight dryness in the palate created by the sulfate. That balance between sulfate and chloride, which made the Burton waters famous, which were the origins of the pale ale and the India pale ales and the bitters. So it's getting that right. So you can see it, but on these website results, but not necessarily know how to build that up into a recipe, how to interpret it, and then create a profile in your mash and sparge liquor, which would then help you create the right beer.
There is calculators available online. Are they, in your experience, useful? Or are they?
Yes, I think they are useful. There are many ones there that are useful, but I would always recommend that if you've got the actual profile analysed by traditional chemistry for your particular beer style, you will tend to get a better support factor if you use the Murphy system. Yeah.
Now, we're covering both here with homebrew and professional brewers. Some homebrewers just add a Campden tablet. We chatted about this last night, just to get rid of chlorine, and you kind of explained the process of how that reacts, where chlorine, it will boil off if the water's boiled before use as well, but a little Campden tablet can help. Is there a particular bottled water that you're aware of that's out there that is a good base across the board for homebrewers, or does that not exist?
I think the thing with bottled waters like Harrogate spring water, which is a very famous spring water near where I live actually, that's they tend to be quite high in carbonates and salts, which is not what you want for brewing, because that introduces too much astringency or sweetness, or it won't allow the correct enzyme processes to take place or the pH development to occur during brewing. So I would shy away from using bottled waters. I would tend to use tap water out of the tap as a base. but have that checked out. It's a very simple thing to do, get it checked out. And we usually recommend that brewers have their water checked once a year, if not twice a year. In our experience, water quality changes from the authorities in the spring and in the autumn on those seasonal changes when there's a lot of socio-economic factors change, and the demand changes, and you also got weather systems which change. We can see over a 10-year period a fluctuation in hardness and these other salts around about those times of the year. So we always recommend brewers get their water checked about that time, and then we can prescribe the correct treatment profile.
I'll always ask the awkward question, and just come into my head when you're talking, I'm going, what about rainwater? What about someone that collects their rainwater? Is it likely to be good for brewing, or is there anything to be aware of it? Or
it's likely to be good for brewing. We do have a number of customers who do that actually. Out in New Zealand, they have quite a lot of rainwater collection systems, and they use rainwater there for that. It's generally pretty clean. It can get contaminated quite quickly in the receptacles in which it's collected. Often these are plastic, and you can get algal growths in them, and then that can change the profile of the water. So there does need to be some sort of understanding of what could be microbiologically there. So some form of Camden tablet sulfite treatment would be recommended beforehand. But you would probably find that you would need to dose quite a lot of salts into it, because rainwater by its very nature is fairly pure water. And so long as it hasn't been standing around for too long, you would need to add some salts to it to make it good for brewing. Particularly for lager, pretty good, because lager waters are fairly light in salts content. But for ales and stouts, you would need to dose quite a bit of salt in there to get it to the right profile.
Let's go through the extensive catalogue that Murphy's have.
It is big.
Specific to water, what should we be looking at? What should we be telling our customers about?
I think the first one, we've talked about alkalinity, and the impact that has on the process is immense. I should mention a little bit about pH, because we do get a lot of questions from brewers who come in and say, oh, my water is pH, raw water is pH 7.3 and yesterday it was 6.9. Should I be concerned about that? The answer is no. pH, the actual pH of the incoming water is irrelevant to the subsequent process. That's an important sort of misconception to dispel at this stage. The first thing we look at is this alkalinity, and if it's high, as in more than about 50 parts per million, 50 ppm, you need to soften it, because the calcium carbonate will affect the way the pH develops throughout the process. And I don't think time would allow us to explain the whole chemistry about that, but believe me, you've got to have a soft water. You've got to get this hardness down to allow the correct enzymatic and subsequent flavour processes to take place. So alkalinity, as you probably guessed from the name, you need to have something to counteract that. So you need to acidify the water. You need an acid medium. And the Murphy's AMS, which stands for acidified Murphy solution, very imaginatively named, I know, but acidified Murphy solution, AMS. It's a blend of hydrochloric and sulfuric acid, food grade, and it's blended in such a way that it will at the correct dose rate, it reduces this alkalinity down to between 30 and 40 or 20 and 50 ppm, I think it is, 20 and 50 ppm, which is, you do need some carbonate there, which I can explain later on, but you've got to be within that range. You've got to get it down to that level so it won't influence pH downstream. So that's the softening process, but at the same time, the salts created by the use of hydrochloric and sulfuric acid are calcium sulfate and calcium chloride, which brewers will know are very much involved in brewing. So they're delivered in a ratio of approximately 2 to 1. So you're already on this 2 to 1 ratio for treating for water for bitters, IPAs and pale ales. Now, if you want to do lager, you want quite a low level of salts all round. So do not treat with AMS. Instead, the traditional way that would be done in sort of Germanic and French systems would be to use lactic acid, a soft organic acid, and this would reduce the alkalinity without adding any more salts. So you then have a lighter flavoured or a more delicate, crisp and zesty, fresher sort of Pilsner style.
So alkalinity, when you're looking at the pH, the critical point is obviously the mash pH. And
yes.
the brewers should be looking at the mash pH,
yes,
not the pH of the water
not
that
the
they're
pH of the water.
with.
No, you should be if a brewer's getting 5.2 pH in his mash after striking in, after 5 minutes, 10 minutes into the stand, take a sample, analyze the pH. He should be 5.2 plus or minus 0.5 of a pH unit. That's critical, because that pH is the optimum pH for the enzymes, amylase and glucanase and these other malt enzymes. That's their optimum pH performance. So you'll get optimal enzymatic action there, which is then the hydrolysis of the starches into sugars, which is critical.
So we're very lucky. British malt, I would be a champion of it. I think it's the best malt in the world, and I think it's commonly accepted now that it is, you know, and we're not just saying that because we distribute for British maltsters, but we also have German malts and Belgian malts available to us as well. When it comes to alkalinity and mash pH, because you're perhaps using a highly modified British malt, do you need to be aware of changes in that mash pH with maybe malt that isn't as highly modified? And, you know, is there concerns to take into consideration during a step mashing process, or is that irrelevant? It's
very relevant, really, and the principles, going back to the science of brewing, the principles remain the same. In order to get the right enzymatic action in the mash, you need to hit the right pH. But also, as you indicated in the question about stepped mashing versus single infusion mashing, continental malts are less well modified, and there's a biological and botanical reason for that, because of barley variety, the growing conditions on the continent versus the growing conditions in the UK, the soils and all the rest of it is quite involved. Continental systems require this lower temperature mashing in at quite a low temperature because they are less well modified, meaning they have more protein in them. And proteins, you need proteases, the enzymes, to break down this protein matrix in continental barleys in order to allow the amylases to access the starches, because there's a bigger quantity of protein there. So proteases have a lower temperature optimum. So you mash in at 45, 50. Then you, as they've done their job, you then raise it to the higher temperatures where the amylases and glucanases are then optimal, and then they can work on the starches. So you have this more involved mashing process, but all the time you still need to be at a pH of 5.2. The enzymes like that sort of pH. So again, you have to have this correct water treatment profile in the mash and subsequent sparge liquor to allow that process to take place satisfactorily.
So we covered AMS. What happens if you want to do the reverse of that? You know, where you're going for, you want to soften your water. What if you're
wanting to harden it up?
You want to harden it up a bit.
Sure. Well, that's pretty easy, really, because you've got, if you're on a low carbonate, low alkalinity liquor, it could be rainwater, could be because you're in a lucky area where you have got very soft water, but you want to make a stout, which maybe requires up to 100, 120 ppm calcium carbonate. Well, you would just add calcium carbonate, and that can be done as adding calcium carbonate, which all schoolboys know is chalk. So you would just add powdered chalk. Not so easy to dissolve, but so you would probably add it as you could add it as a pre-dissolved solution, but you would just calculate the difference that you have from your existing hardness to your desired hardness and work that out in grams per litre or grams per hectolitre, and then you would add that as an additive, as a salt additive. And it's as simple as that. You can add sodium bicarbonate. They're quite cheap, these chemicals, but it's important to understand that you need to have food grade chemicals, and they need to be of a reputable source.
So I know we're going through the Murphy products, but there's something just came to mind there in relation to adding these products. Your sparge water. So it's all, you've adjusted the water, and I just thought to myself, how do we adjust our sparge water? I know a lot of brewers that they just put the chemicals or the salts on top of the mash bed and then sparge over the top of it. Is that suffice, or do they need to separately dose the sparge tank?
I think, yes, it comes back to this level of complexity that the brewer has at his disposal. It's preferential to treat the hot liquor tank, so that your hot liquor, that you've then got a homogeneous, uniform quality within a big body of water. So mashing, sparging, breakdown liquor, whatever, it's all the same. That's the ideal, but that might not be possible for some brewers at the smaller end of the scale. So to do it by just sprinkling on the relevant salts on top of the mash is satisfactory.
Okay.
That would work.
Let's go back to the Murphy products.
Okay.
What else have you got in your arsenal?
So we've got a product called DWB, which is another acronym for a water treatment chemical. This time the AMS is a liquid solution, as I mentioned, but the DWB is a dry powder solution, and it stands for dry water Burtonization. So what we've done is we've understood the chemical profile of Burton water, which is the building block of IPA, and we've manufactured a powder which incorporates these three chemicals. And basically it's a specific blend of calcium sulfate, magnesium sulfate and calcium chloride, and in a ratio so that you will achieve, in conjunction with AMS treatment, and knowing what your base liquor is already in there, working it out so to deliver the correct way. So those are the two sort of prime, the foundation building blocks for liquor treatment are AMS and DWB. However, that's a sort of generic treatment. You can then start to, as I mentioned earlier, you can get a bit more specific and a bit more tailor-made, and you can have more or less of calcium chloride or calcium sulfate or magnesium sulfate or calcium carbonate. You can have them by them individually, and or you can, if you wanted a particular blend, but you found yourself to become quite successful and you had your volume was big, we could make up packs for you specifically for you, which we do for some of the great names that we have in the UK. Some of the big family names have got their own bespoke liquor treatments now. So that's also a possibility that we can do for that.
So we've looked at acids, AMS, DWB. You've mentioned there briefly, you can buy the chemicals separately. So calcium chloride flakes and, gypsum, probably the two best selling for us in terms of brewers seem to go for that. Anything else that you'd recommend that our brewers are looking at in relation to that?
In terms of the liquor treatments, that probably covers it. I can't really think. The lactic acid is the important one to use for lager production. I know we do get some inquiries for phosphoric acid as a way of treating softening water, which is fine. It does the same sort of, chemically, it's doing the same thing. It's reducing the alkalinity. But two things to bear in mind there. One is you start getting salts of phosphate salts, which can have an impact in certain beer styles. And secondly, it's really quite expensive. So why pay more 4 or 5 times for the same thing? And I know economies are quite important to some of the brewers. Especially in the current climate. In relation to water treatment, so we've went through those specifics. Is there anything else, any tips through your extensive experience as a master brewer and from working at Murphy's that people should be considering to make life easier for themselves? I know you're saying understanding the water. That's a tip that I've taken from you. So you're saying, look, this is critically important. Get to know what you have before you start to treat it. Well, just to develop that statement further, really, is get to know what you're dealing with. Malt in particular, so many of the downstream issues that brewers face come from malt and their handling of it and their buying of it.
So buy a good quality malt is what we
buy
tell
a good quality malt, and there's always a discussion about price in the marketplace and price and the cost of this and the cost of that, but always go for what you can afford and try and get a little bit more. Go for pay. If you pay good money for good quality materials, you will be rewarded in the good quality of your own product. It's an age-old maxim, and I've never seen it so true as explained in the brewing industry. Good quality malt will give good quality beer alongside well-treated water and a close observation of the brewing process.
There's a massive hazy beer trend going on at the moment, and some very talented local brewers making great beer. Just to cover that very briefly, they talk about flipping the salts in relation to those styles, specifically the New England IPA, to give it that pillowy, soft mouthfeel. Have you any tips on that?
The only thing I would say about that is I think that what we noticed there is that what we call chloride forward beers tend to work well with the high hopping rates that these hazy beers seem to have, so that you've got the bitterness and a perceived astringency and the characteristics which that hopping regime gives. But to balance that, you can use calcium chloride as a salt, because the chloride is important element here in terms of developing a sweetness, a slight mellowness.
Yeah.
It'll counteract a little bit of that bitterness. I mean, we all put sodium chloride, salt, on our fish and chips, and it's a flavour stimulant. It enhances, it draws out flavour.
Yeah.
So you get to a point where you're drawing out more flavour by adding a little bit more chloride, and that's what we've seen. And so I would just suggest that brewers added more calcium chloride, but not too much, because you get to a point where it becomes excessive, and all of a sudden you tip the balance, and you get sickly sort of flavours which are not good, which are detrimental.
Does that make malt flavour shine and hop flavour, or is there different salts that make hop shine more than malt, or am I getting too complicated here?
It's getting quite complicated now. I think I would ease back. If you're wanting malt and hops to shine, I think I would ease back a little bit on the liquor treatments and just go for the minimum, and get the pH right in the process, because pH is also a big governor of flavour perception, and by getting the salts correct, we'll do that more effectively and ease back a little bit on it. So sometimes less is more sort of concept.
Yeah. Okay, so just to cover this, to break it into two sections. So if you're a commercial brewer, it makes sense for you to send your water into Murphy's to get tested, and then they give you the breakdown for we've went through this: lagers, pale ales, and stouts. If you're a home brewer at home, perhaps you don't have that, and you're using the water board data that you've got off an internet search for your local council area. So you're going to need a variety of salts at home. We sell them in little 100-gram packs, so you'll need to, depending on whether you're hard water or soft water, you're going to need a selection of those. So the basics are going to be calcium chloride, gypsum, AMS, DWB. If you want lactic acid and phosphoric acid, then you've got yourself like a nice little kit for playing with multiple. Is that covering everything, Nick, or would there be anything else that covers, you would?
One thing I would do for that, which has just come to mind about that, talking of putting things on a sort of micro scale like that, is that the keen home brewer could also do their own little water test beforehand to confirm what perhaps we've already said or they've learnt off the internet. We sell these little alkalinity test kits, and it's just a series of tablets. You take a sample of your water and you add tablets to it, and when you see a colour change, you equate the number of tablets you've added to the colour change, and then from our little chart it'll tell you the alkalinity of the water, and then from that you can then increase or decrease the amount of acid you add. So that can be done real live time, so when the home brewer is there, he can actually, okay, well today I'm going to do this now, I can make it really as up to date as possible.
Dylan's going to want to do that video now, and now that you've mentioned it, we don't stock that, so I'll take a note.
It's
and
called
say,
a Palin test. It's called a Palin test kit. Bigger brewers use it as well, because we did have one brewery in Wakefield, in West Yorkshire, and they were right on the cusp of two water catchment areas, and this problem took us nearly 2 years to solve. Yeah. He would he would fill up his hot liquor tank, do everything treatment the night before, came to mashed in, and then went 1 hour, 1 hour 10, saccharification, mash stand, comes to sparge, and his hot liquor tank wasn't big enough to do the mash and the sparge, so he would have to refill his hot liquor tank to provide enough volume to sparge and heat it up, which he did. The liquor profile changed. On the sparge, so it wasn't the same liquor that he mashed with. And why was that? Well, it took us a long time to figure it out. Anyway, the long story short, he used these little test kits, and he could then see how the sparge liquor had increased in hardness. So he could then retreat the hot liquor tank just in time for his sparging. The reason going further upstream was because overnight the Water Authority switched from one treatment plant to another treatment plant in a different part of West Yorkshire. So he actually got a different liquor coming in in the morning when he'd drained his mashed, after he'd mashed, topped up again. It was a different water supply. And it was so different, it was like 150 ppm hardness different. Made a huge difference to his subsequent brewing.
And the quality of the beer in the end as well.
Quality of the beer in the end. And for years he was struggling with that. And until we've discovered that, And it was using these little Palin test kits that we did it.
Yeah.
So we were testing every 10 minutes through the whole brewing process. And then we suddenly noticed that it changed between mashing and sparging.
Yeah.
So we said, well, what's going on here? And he said, well, actually, I didn't. And we didn't know his liquor tank wasn't big enough.
Yeah.
And then he said, well, actually, what I have to do is, we didn't know. So what happens now? Oh, well, I just fill it up again. So we said, right, okay. So then we tested the liquor, and it was all different. So we then said, then we go back to the Water Authority and ring up Mr. Yorkshire Water. Can you? We're working here at this brewery in Wakefield, and can you tell us what you've done there? Oh yeah, we've come from this reservoir now. Now the daytime, overnight we do it from this reservoir, but during the day we do it from this reservoir.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's what we need to know.
Yeah.
So he could then treat, and so that's an example of how you can use a little test kit like that as a home brewer scale.
Yeah. I will get them added to the website. It's interesting that we picked up on that today. So every day's a school day.
You never stop learning.
Never stop learning. Yeah. Like that's a brief overview of water treatments, and obviously we've covered some of the products that we stock here for Murphy and Son. We have those available in Ireland for our craft brewers, and we have them on our e-commerce website for home brewers. If you're outside of our territory, we've popped the link down below for Murphy and Son, and you can get in contact with Nick directly, and he'll help you out with those. Where you've had an overview from Nick, hearing how you fine-tune those specifics in relation to lagers, pales, bitters, and stouts. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy brewing.